There's a lot more in life than just holding your suffering to zero. There's a lot of stuff north of zero, and it's completely different from getting rid of the negatives.
Welcome to the Coaching Revealed podcast series. I'm one of your hosts, Austin Matzel. In this episode of Coaching Revealed, we are reaching into our archive of resources and sharing a keynote address Martin Seligman delivered at the Institute of Coaching's 2024 Coaching and Leadership in Healthcare Conference. Drawing on decades of research, Martin shares his findings on the profound impact emerging from coaching and positive psychology. In his address, Martin covers three main goals: a 25-year progress report on the development of positive psychology, the implications of positive psychology onto coaching practices, and the potential of artificial intelligence in transforming coaching and human well-being. To trace the progress of positive psychology, Martin shares the historical context of the 25 years of research and practice that have occurred within the field, including the exploration of shifts in how psychologists view happiness back then and today, and unveiling goals Martin sees for human flourishing by the year 2051. Martin also covers his PERMA model, a well-being model that is outlined by 5 measurable components: positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. Martin shares the scientific validity of these measures, along with opportunities for coaches to integrate PERMA within their practice. To close out his talk, Martin highlights emerging technologies in the coaching space, specifically AI chatbots, such as Ask Martin, a bot that was programmed off of Martin's wealth of work and research. Through this example, Martin creates a vision of how coaches can utilize technology to bolster their client relationships. Thank you for tuning in to Coaching Revealed. Let's get started.
Negative psychology, or psychology as usual, is to psychotherapy as positive psychology is to what? And the answer is coaching. And so the outgrowth, the most meaningful possible outgrowth of positive psychology is coaching. In many ways, that's my theme today. Truth in advertising. I was a licensed psychotherapist. They took my license away, by the way, in 1998 when I was president of the American Psychological Association. They said I didn't have enough continuing education that year. But I've never really been a coach, so I've not been down in the trenches the way you have. And so a lot of what I'm going to say about the relevance of positive psychology to coaching, you should take with a grain of salt. I want to try to do 3 things today. The first is to give a progress report on positive psychology. So over the last 25 years, positive psychology has moved from its infancy through toddlerhood, and now I'd say it's scientifically and in practice in adolescence. And that maturation has a lot of implications for coaching, and I'll talk about what I think they are. And then finally, I want to talk about what I'm most excited about these days, and that is the implications of artificial intelligence for coaching and for psychotherapy. And I'll present some brand new findings about this. So that's what I'm after today. Let me outline what I'm going to do. When I was a therapist, the opening line was not infrequently, "Doctor, I just want to be happy." And I'd say, "Oh, you mean you don't want to be depressed?" It was a case of, "Doctor, can you cure what I have? I hope you have what I can cure." That is, when people told me they wanted to be happy 50 years ago, 45 years ago, I really didn't know what to do with that notion. And now I know what to say about it. And I think really for the first time on a scientific measurement and intervention basis, more happiness, more well-being can be your life goal. And it can be the life goal of your clients. Not just not to suffer, but to actually be happier. And those are 2 different things. I'm going to talk about the evolution of positive psychology from 1994 to now. I'll talk about the theory that I have of what happiness and well-being are. It's measurable, and I'll talk about measures of it. 30 years ago, most people, including me, when said, well, we should do research on happiness and intervene, I thought of it as an epiphenomenon, that happiness itself was a consequence of a good marriage, a good life, good health, and the like. But what's been so important in the last 30 years of research is well-being now is a very potent cause of future well-being. Well-being in itself is not just something that makes you feel good and makes you smile, but it actually causes much better well-being, and I'll take you through that. There are now interventions that have passed the random assignment placebo-controlled gold standard that work in coaching and psychotherapy, and I'll tell you a bit about that as well. And very importantly for me, it's applied. I'll talk briefly about the military application, the United States Army, about positive education, about positive psychotherapy, and about the notion of a positive corporation. And then I'll talk, and this in many ways is the heart of what I want to say, about the implications of a maturing science and practice of positive psychology for science-based, well-documented coaching. And then in the last 10 minutes or so, I want to turn to the question of what you do as coaches in the first month of coaching. That is, you're trying to get to know your client. Turns out AI may be an enormous help with that. And then I want to talk about the content of what you do in coaching. And I'll tell you about a device invented in China. We'll try it out here, called Ask Martin, and try a couple of examples. I want to conclude by saying we now have a science and practice of well-being, which in many ways, for me, forms the scientific basis of good coaching. So that's what I'm after today. Let's go back 30 years ago. I'm just deciding to run for president of APA, and I'm working under essentially a disease model. Freud and Schopenhauer both told us that the best we could ever do in life was not to be miserable, not to suffer. And so a good life was a life in which you held your misery as close to zero as possible. Now, positive psychology says that that notion is empirically false, morally insidious, and a dead end for coaching and psychotherapy. That is, there's a lot more in life than just holding your suffering to zero. There's a lot of stuff north of zero, and it's completely different from getting rid of the negatives. So the positives are not the absence of the negatives. There was no theory of well-being. So under the medical model, which was about illness and about suffering, the question of what is happiness, what is well-being, essentially really didn't exist theoretically. So that's the way things looked to me 30 years ago. There were no measures of well-being. All of our measures were anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, divorce, alcoholism, panic, drug abuse, DSM, essentially. Happiness was considered an epiphenomenon. It was the froth on top of the espresso was misery. And what happiness was the foam on top of the espresso that had no causal implications. It was just a measure of how good your life was or how less miserable it was. There were no interventions to build happiness. All of our pharmacological and psychological interventions were about reducing misery. In many ways, if I had a title for this talk, it would be this analogy that the outgrowth of psychology as usual in 1994 was psychotherapy. So that's where things were 30 years ago. And most importantly, there was almost no science on well-being. and there was no practice of well-being. So here's my progress report. This is what positive psychology looks like to me 30 years later. Having high well-being, having good mental health, not just the absence of mental illness, are plausible individual goals, corporate goals, national goals, and worldwide goals. So my ambition, I won't be here to see it, but we can hold a seance and you can report it to me, is 51, which is in the year 2051, half of the world's population will be flourishing. That's a plausible planetary goal, and it's a measurable one. I have a theory, something in progress, of what happiness and well-being are. I'll tell you more about it in a bit, and that there are 5 elements that one wants to pursue in coaching and in positive psychology. P is more positive emotion, subjective well-being. E is engagement, being one with the music. R is good relationships. M is that you matter and that you have meaning. And A is accomplishment, and I'll talk more about that. Well-being is finally well measured. I have a free website called Authentic Happiness, oneword.org. Over 6 million people have been there and have taken the tests, and they're very important for coaching because they're free to you. You can have your clients for free, take them at time 1, and then ask questions about your interventions. I used to have 2,000 new visitors every day, I should say, but starting about 2 years ago, I noticed it went up to 20,000 a day. And I couldn't figure out what happened. And so I talked to my 16-year-old daughter, and she said, "Oh, you're on TikTok." So it turns out that's what happened, a movement from the ground up. That happiness causes mental health. It causes success, and it causes you to live longer than you would otherwise. And I'll go through some of that evidence, that there are at least a dozen and maybe quite a bit more interventions that you can do in coaching that reliably build happiness. And very importantly, they don't cure mental illness, but they buffer against mental illness. I'll review some of that. And that leads to the other part of the analogy, that positive psychology's most important outgrowth is coaching. And that we now, 30 years later, have at least an adolescent science of happiness and well-being, and that you represent a viable practice of human well-being, and that your future is very promising. I think we've reached a limit pharmacologically, psychologically, on what we can do about mental illness. I don't think we're going to see more improvements of that. We're at a 60% barrier in mental illness. Coaching can do much better than that in promoting well-being as opposed to alleviating mental illness. Let's go through these things in some detail. The theory of well-being is PERMA, says there are 5 things you can work on. They're measurable, and these are the 5 things that positive psychology is about. The first is subjective well-being, how you're feeling right now, what your life satisfaction is, your contentment, your fulfillment, and the like. The second element is when time stops for you, when you're completely one with the music. The third element is good relationships. We are not only selfish Dawkins, selfish gene creatures, but we're very much like termites and wasps and bees. We're hive creatures, and our hedonic system is wired to help other people. As a coach, what you should probably know, if there's one, I'm often asked, what's the one thing you could do right now if you're unhappy to make yourself happier in the next hour? The single most reliable thing to do is to leave this lecture right now, go out and find someone who needs help and help them. It turns out we're wired for well-being, to kindness. The fourth is meaning and purpose. I've gotten a little disenchanted with the notion of meaning. So I use do we matter, and making people feel they matter more as a more important thing than is your life meaningful? Finally, accomplishment is exceedingly important element. Mastery, competence, and the like. In many ways, and I'll get to it in a moment, if you want a scope of practice for coaching, and I think coaching seriously needs a scope of practice, those are the 5 elements that I would point to as a responsible scope of practice. Causation. Is PERMA just a consequence of success in life, of a good marriage, of vitality? Well, we've known that. Your grandmother knew that. But what your grandmother didn't know is that your PERMA right now is a major cause of better PERMA in the future. Now, what I'm going to do is describe in about 4 minutes, probably about 1,000 articles. And these are all longitudinal studies. Ed Diener, who died about 4 years ago, the best empirical scientist in positive psychology, was responsible for leading many of them. These are all longitudinal studies of the following form. You measure PERMA, or some aspect like how happy you are right now at time 1, and you also look at something like grade point average at time 1. And then you come back a year later and you ask, can you predict grade point average from prior grade point average and or from happiness at time 1, co-varying out grade point average at time 1. So these are all well-done longitudinal studies in which you ask, what does well-being right now predict over and above physical health, grade point average, promotions, how much money you're making, and the like. And let me go through this literature. First, health and longevity. If you exercise every day as I do, that statistically brings you about 3 years of life. If you don't smoke, that brings you between 4 and 5 extra years of life. If you're an optimist, that brings you between 6 and 8 years extra life. Oh, I should say something about extra life, but the best book I read last year, which is not about positive psychology, is called Extra Life, and it's by Stephen Johnson. I want to plug it. And he asked the question, if newspapers only came out once a century, what would the headline be for the 20th century? And a lot of people say, oh, Stalin, Hitler, World War II, etc. The headline, Johnson says, would be that lifespan across the entire world doubled. You got 35 extra years of life. Well, at any rate, in the health and longevity literature, the cardiovascular literature is probably the best here. Being in the bottom quartile of pessimism is about like risk factor of smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day. And that's very important because in coaching, there are good methods for changing pessimism into optimism, which I'll talk about later. Better social relationships. So it turns out that misery loves company, but company does not like misery. And that is, you statistically hang up on people quicker when they're moping than when they're chirpy and cheerful in controlled experiments. Work productivity. I'll talk about this important new data of Jean-Emmanuel Deneuve's on work productivity, but basically productivity seems to be a linear function of how happy workers are. And I'll talk about that in about 10 minutes. By the way, the reason that's important is coaching can now be sold, not just about making people happier and having high well-being, but it's money-making, it's productive. Virtuous behavior. Barbara Ehrenreich in Bright-Sided claimed that we shouldn't make people happier, likens me to the Wizard of Oz. And she says basically the problem about making people happier is they become indifferent. They're so happy they become indifferent to the suffering of the world. You make people happier, they're going to become worse citizens. Now, were that true, I would basically give this all up, since I'm very concerned with politics and democracy and citizenship. But it turns out there are 20 studies of the relationship of happiness and depression to being a good citizen. And basically, happy people, less depressed people, volunteer more, they give more money to charity, they vote more, and the like. They're more politically active and the like. And if you've worked in depression, as many of you have and I have, when you're depressed, you turn inward. You're number one, and you're thinking about yourself. When you're happy, you turn outward to the world. Very important about building happiness, build good citizenship. Creativity. There's the myth of Sylvia Plath, which basically says, you want to be creative, be suicidal, and miserable. But it turns out Plath, like Dostoevsky, was bipolar, not unipolar. During depression, she does nothing at all. It's when she's hypomanic that she writes good poetry. So it turns out innovation is an important function of well-being. And resilience, which I've worked on a lot of my life, is when bad things happen like COVID, who recovers? Who bounces back? Well, it turns out that people with high PERMA bounce back, in particular, optimistic people. PERMA is measurable. That's AuthenticHappiness.org. Feel free to use it for yourself and for your clients. And they're also, I'm not going to have time to talk about it, you can not only do questionnaires, but you can take press conferences. Sports heroes, presidents, dead people don't take questionnaires. What you can accomplish by content analyzing, as we do presidential speeches and the like, for various PERMA variables, and predict, in many ways, interesting political stuff as well. But at any rate, well-being is now measurable. And there are interventions that work. So from the Buddha to Tony Robbins, there have been at least 200 interventions suggested that work. Many people around the world who work on research in positive psychology take different interventions, and they run random assignment, placebo-controlled experiments, and you ask what really does work. There are at least a dozen of them. They're all usable in coaching. I just have time to talk about one of them. So I'll do active constructive for now. 3 blessings is every night before you go to sleep. Write down 3 things that went well. Signature strengths is using your highest strengths at work more. Active constructive is one you may not know, so I think I'll do that one. My wife, Mandy, has a website called Seeing Happy, in which taking pictures of the things that make you happy and sharing them with the community make people happier. There are 5 large meta-analyses now of this, involving at least 100,000 subjects and at least 400 articles, and basically the positive interventions work. Lower depression, they buffer against anxiety, and most importantly, they raise life satisfaction and well-being. I'll take you through just one of them now. About 3 years ago, Mandy came downstairs. Mandy's a amateur black and white photographer. And she said, Marty, I just got a call from the editor of Black and White magazine. I won first prize. What do you say to your husband or your wife or someone you really care about when they give you good news? Now, as those of you, how many of you are marriage counselors? Okay, well, being a marriage counselor is about the most difficult form of psychotherapy I know. You're basically trying to get people to fight better. You're trying to change insufferable marriages into barely tolerable marriages. When I teach it, what you do is you teach people about fighting and conflict and the like. So about 15 years ago, a group of positive marriage counselors said, let's not look at how people fight. Let's look at how they celebrate together. So the question here is, what should I have said to Mandy when she told me this astonishing thing that she had beaten all these New York Times photojournalists. Well, it turns out there are 2 by 2. So had I not read the literature, what I would have said was passive constructive. Congratulations, dear, you're a great photographer, you deserve it. That has no effect. It's wallpaper. I've trained 40,000 drill sergeants in the United States Army about this. They are, as you imagine them, active destructive. Mandy, you know what tax bracket that's going to put us into? Passive destructive is what's for dinner. And the only thing that works, and it doesn't come naturally, is active constructive. So active constructive starts with something that makes it clear to the person you love that you know what you're talking about. And so I said something like, Mandy, was it the swan that you photographed at Blenheim the year before last that won the award? And she said, yeah, it was. And he said, well, that's the best black and white picture I've ever seen of an animal. When I located that this wasn't just you deserve it, then the object is to put her or him in touch with what just happened. When good things happen to us, we're such a humble, modest society. We concentrate on the mean stuff and the bad stuff, and the good stuff goes away. So I wanted Mandy to relive it. So I said, well, where were you when the editor called? And she told me. I said, now, verbatim exactly, what did he say? And she went through it. Then I said, well, how is it possible that you could have beaten Pulitzer Prize winning photojournalists for this award? What are your signature strengths in photography? And so she talked about gray. And she said she was very good at nuancing gray in photography. And then I said, we homeschool our children. Well, how can you use that skill to teach them drawing and photography better? And then that bottle of Dom Perignon that's been sitting in the refrigerator for 5 years, let's open it up now. So it turns out love and commitment goes up, divorce goes down, and measurably sex gets better when you do this. Applications, United States Army, 40,000 drill sergeants, 1.1 million soldiers. Positive education, the notion that we should start in school, and particularly in early adolescence. We start in middle school, and there are K through 12 programs for doing this in the schools, and it's widely adopted outside the United States. Australia, England, China in particularly does this in a wide scale. United States hasn't much done it. Positive psychotherapy, for those of you who are psychotherapists, this is the manual of positive psychotherapy that Tayyab Rashid did and was kind enough to put my name on it. And positive corporations, I'm a paid consultant on the scientific board for BetterUp. So again, what I'm about to say, you should know I'm an employee of BetterUp. Let me try to give you as unbiased a story as I can, because it's highly relevant to you as successful coaches. Not infrequently over the last decade, I'd be in a meeting with a CFO or a CEO, and I talk about what I just did, and they'd nod their heads and said, oh, well, nice to have people be happy, but is it profitable? Yeah, I'm running a company, and my job is increasing profit, not making my workers happier. And so up until last May, I said, honestly, there is 50 articles basically on happiness and promotions, productivity and the like, but they don't satisfy me scientifically. So I really was unable to push coaching and to push well-being as a lever of productivity. Well, John Emmanuel Deneuve last May published the definitive study of productivity and well-being. I'll go through it briefly. This is a study of 1,100 American companies that employ 15 million people. So it's the largest study ever done. And The workers are asked 4 questions at time 1. How happy are you at work? How satisfied are you with your job? How much meaning and purpose does your job have? And how stressful is it? Reverse scored. Those 4 items are taken together and they give you a number. And at time 1, you measure the profitability of the company and its stock market price. You come back 9 months later and you ask, as a function of those 4 questions at time 1, what's the stock market price? What's the profitability? Linear relationship. And the reason this is important for coaching, when I saw this, I asked BetterUp to take the last 40,000 people they had coached and transform their variables into those 4 questions. This is a question: does coaching increase those 4 variables? And the answer, they did it for the last 44,000 people, was, again, a linear increase in well-being on those 4 variables in time. That means, as a coach, you can say you're not just about increasing the well-being of people, that you can make people more productive. So now when I talk to HR people, I say, HR is not just about holding the hands of your workers. You're actually a main lever of profitability. So that's the corporation method. And does it really work? And the answer is these 5 meta-analyses that I can refer you to.
Ready to advance your coaching practice? Join the Institute of Coaching and tap into the world's leading resource for coaching science and professional development. With over 4,000 members across 130 countries, the IOC offers invaluable networking opportunities with an elite global coaching community and innovative learning to broaden your knowledge and keep you at the forefront of coaching best practices. Engage in cutting-edge learning events with world-renowned coaching scholars, from webinars and seminars to discussion groups, research projects, and more. Try any membership free for 30 days. Use promo code IOC Podcast and visit instituteofcoaching.org/join to get started.
Okay, what are the implications of this large body of research that I've talked about for 30 minutes now for coaching? And it is that, at least as a subset of what you do, I think you can carve out something called positive psychology coaching. It's scientifically credible based on what I just said. It gives you a scope of practice. It says, I'm not about changing everything in the people I work with. I can change positive emotion, I can change engagement, I can help you improve relationships, I can change meaning, mattering, and purpose, and I can change accomplishment. That's what the Deneuve data tells us. There is a group, by the way, who also say there's a 6th variable called V, which is vitality. So at any rate, that's the scope of practice. I can change those 6 things. Secondly, it gives you validated measures of outcomes to do before and after, and they're free. So you can measure what you're doing. Third, there are a large number of validated interventions and prevention, all of which are applicable in coaching, and all of which have good scientific evidence behind it. And it tells you what the desired outcome of this kind of coaching is, more permanent. So that's the view from maturing science of positive psychology for evidence-based coaching. Okay, so that's more than the first half of what I wanted to say. And now I'm going to take you to what I'm really excited about. I'm going to talk about 2 sets of endeavors. And the theme of this is AI can be braided with your human skills as coaches to produce much better coaching and much quicker coaching. So let me tell you what these 2 developments are. What do you do in the first month of psychotherapy or in the first month of coaching? Basically, you're trying to get to know your client. There's jargon for that. It's called narrative identity. What is her life story? Well, for those of you who are here, good coaches, you can do this pretty well in about a month. So Abby Blyler, my graduate student, asked the question, could we get a machine to do this even better? What she did was we first taught ChatGPT 4.0 what an identity is. So you have to teach it, and teach it what a life story is, what a narrative identity is. We took 26 people and we asked them to give this 50 random thoughts, and their demographic, their education, their gender, their income. And then we go to ChatGPT 4 and we say, okay, here's a person, here's 50 things they thought, here are their demographics, what's their life story? This one's representative. A 48-year-old self-employed man from New Jersey finds himself caught between ambition and doubt, driven by the desire to achieve and a lurking fear of failure. Growing up in an environment where hard work and community values were prized, he sought to make something of himself, obtaining a bachelor's degree and pursuing self-employment. Along the way, he embraced marriage and fatherhood. It goes on in this way. The respect and acceptance he feels within his team and the love of his country and culture are the ties that bind him to a greater societal fabric. Despite the internal turmoil, he's built a life that resonates with contentment and pride. Each day is a dance between the mundane and the profound, between being a provider, husband, father, team member, and individual. The story is not a linear trajectory, but a complete tapestry of emotions, thought, responsibility, and dreams, reflecting a life lived with depth and authenticity. This is a machine generating this from absolutely minimum material. Is it accurate? Well, let's see. So we gave it to the 26 people, and we asked them, is this accurate? And 25 of the 26 said it was either completely accurate or mostly accurate. And more than half of them said they learned something new about themselves they didn't know. I learned I should take action rather than thinking. I trust in the process of my life. Okay, part one, you can use this machine to help you get to know your patient. And you can go back and forth. Your client. You can go back and forth with this machine-generated identity and what you believe. Now, can this assist you as a coach in what you do? So again, we went to GPT-4. It has read the literature on coaching. It's read the literature on positive psychology. It knows the outcomes. And we said, design coaching for the next month. And here's what you get. First, you get what the changes you want to work on are. As she wrestles with these feelings, her narrative reflects a poignant quest for understanding, emotional security, and self-affirmation. So you get what the issues are. Then you get a coaching outline for them, self-esteem building, encourage her to explore her strengths and successes, and possibly help to develop a self-affirmation routine to build her confidence. And then you get tailored coaching from it, smart goal setting, grief ritual and ceremony, mindfulness and meditation, resilience techniques. The first half of what I wanted to say about AI, this machine can really help you get to know your client. More than that is you can use your combined skill of your getting to know your client and the machine to refine that and then to give you the main issues for coaching, and it takes you to the literature on interventions that work on those issues. So I think that's important for the future of effective coaching. Now, the final thing I want to tell you about is the astonishing thing. That's all about the form of coaching. How about the content? How about what you say to your client? So 12 months ago, my student, Yukun Zhao, who is a MAP student and a PhD at Tsinghua in Beijing, emailed me and said, Marty, we've got the same problems in China that you do in America, and we don't have enough coaches or therapists to go around. So we've invented a virtual Seligman. We fed it all of your speeches and your books. Try it out. I said, really? So I started to try it with the most difficult questions I could think of. And now I've done it 300 times with different people. And it is remarkable. It's a better therapist than I am. And for two reasons. Oh, by the way, you type in a 150-word problem. I'd like you all to try it. The harder, the better. Lots of detail and concrete things. It thinks for about a minute. And then in my voice, they've synthesized my voice in English and in Mandarin. You get about a 750-word response. It's better than me for two reasons. One, unlike me, it remembers everything I've said. And I just remember the gist of it. In fact, we're gist people. I don't remember the details at all. It's got all the details. And secondly, it's got a much better bedside manner than I do. So as those of you who know me well know that I'm brusque and laconic and, here's the answer, leave me alone. It doesn't do this. So let me give you a couple of examples of this. Okay, here's a typical one I get from young people. There are variants on it, but I'll just tell you the story of one recently. I get almost every day someone emails me asking for advice. And one person emailed me a few weeks ago and said, I'd like 3 pieces of advice from you. And so I wrote up number 1, number 2. Number 3 was, how can I possibly be happy in such a shitty world in which all these terrible things are happening? That's a hard one to answer. So I thought I'd go to Ask Martin. I gave it to Ask Martin. I cut and pasted. And the next day I got email from her and it said, Dear Professor Seligman, thank you so much for your advice, particularly number 3, that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. So it's the existential dread problem. Okay, is there a way we can get the audio on here? Okay, I'm going to try it.
Oh, I can really empathize with that feeling of existential dread that creeps up at night. It's like your mind decides it's the perfect time to throw a party. And guess what? All your deepest fears and worries are invited. But there's actually something quite wonderful we can do to combat this. I've always been a big fan of the 3 good things exercise. It's simple yet surprisingly powerful. Before you go to bed, just reflect on 3 things that went well during your day. They don't have to be big wins. Maybe you enjoyed a really good cup of coffee, or you shared a laugh with a friend. And then think about why these things happened. It's not just about the good stuff. It's about recognizing your own role in making these moments happen. This practice can shift your focus from what's worrying you to what's working for you. It's a bit like reprogramming your brain to tune into a more optimistic frequency. And the beauty of it is that it can help you sleep better because you're ending your day on a high note, focusing on the positives rather than the negatives. Now, engagement is another key ingredient to a good life. It's about finding those activities where you're so absorbed, time just flies by. For some, that might be gardening or playing a musical instrument. For you, it might be something entirely different. But engaging in these activities regularly can really help keep those existential worries at bay because you're too busy being involved in something you love. Let's not forget about relationships. We humans are social creatures, and nurturing positive relationships is crucial for our well-being. So if you're lying awake at night, think about the people who bring joy into your life. Maybe plan to reach out to someone the next day or reminisce about a happy memory you shared with a loved one. Accomplishment and meaning are also vital. They're like the seasonings that add flavor to life. Setting goals, achieving them, and understanding the why behind what we do can give us a profound sense of purpose. Lastly, let's talk about human flourishing, my ultimate goal for positive psychology. It's about creating a life rich with positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement, what I like to call PERMA. Every night as you lay there, think about what you can do the next day to enhance each of these elements. It might be expressing gratitude, setting a small goal, connecting with a friend, finding time for a hobby, or helping someone out. So as you nestle into bed tonight, rather than letting dread take the wheel, grab your mental pen and jot down your 3 good things. Dwell in the present, cherish your connections.
Here's the next one. I'm 81 years old. I've been teaching psychology for 60 years. I worry about my mental and physical stamina, and then I fear my abilities are declining. I even forgot the name of a student publicly the other day. I also notice my hearing is getting worse. This makes it harder to answer questions. What do you advise?
First off, I want to say how wonderful it is that you've dedicated so much of your life to teaching and enriching the minds of others. It's an extraordinary accomplishment and a testament to your passion and resilience. Now, as we age, it's perfectly natural to notice certain changes in our abilities, and it can be disconcerting, to say the least. But, there's this really hopeful side to the story. You see, our brains are incredibly adaptable, and they possess this fantastic ability to grow and change throughout our lives, a concept known as neuroplasticity. So even at 81, you can continue to build your mental capacity. Isn't that just remarkable? It's like how exercising can keep your body strong. Engaging in new learning experiences can help maintain cognitive fitness. So picking up a new hobby, learning a language, or even playing a musical instrument can make a significant difference. Now let's talk about the memory slips and hearing issues you mentioned. These things happen, and they're part of the natural aging process, but they don't have to define us. It's important to focus on the strengths you still have, your wisdom, your experience, and the relationships you've built over the years. And remember, everyone forgets names now and then, even the best of us. I completely understand your concerns about dementia. It's a common worry as we get older, but let's not forget that our fears can sometimes run ahead of reality. More often than not, what we're experiencing are typical age-related changes, not necessarily signs of dementia. And when it comes to your ability to lead and guide others, that's where you shine, my friend. Your role as a mentor and a source of wisdom is invaluable, and it grows richer with each year. I've got to say, your reflections on your life are truly inspiring. It sounds like you have a high level of well-being across the board, positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. That's what my PERMA model is all about, and I'm thrilled to hear that you rate yourself so highly in these areas. This is a clear indication that you're doing a lot of things right, and you should take great pride in that. And about your personal life with Mandy and the kids, it's clear they bring you immense joy. That's the good stuff, the stuff that makes life sparkle. The loving kindness meditation you mentioned, it's a powerful practice. It can enhance our feelings of compassion and connectedness, which are essential for our well-being. So my advice, keep engaging with life, keep learning, and keep connecting with those around you. Embrace your role as a leader and a source of positive influence. And maybe find that young colleague to take the pledge as a way to keep the lines of communication open about your performance, just as Dick Solomon did with me. But remember, it's not about stepping back. It's about stepping differently into the light of your rich experience and wisdom. In the end, it's about flourishing, my friend, continuing to grow and thrive in all aspects of life. Keep looking forward.
So my vision is that between sessions, for example, you can take a problem you're working on with a client and give it to Ask Martin and then feed it back. What Ask Martin doesn't do so far, what you do is dialectical in coaching. You never give 1,000 words at once. Basically, you do a sequence and you don't act until the client is ready to hear. Well, so far the machines don't have enough memory to do the dialectical. But this is a beginning, and I think it's exactly the kind of thing that will make coaching more effective. There are a lot of problems as a coach you don't know the answer to. Well, this machine has a lot of the answers at its fingertips. We have a science of well-being now. We've got a theory of what we can work on. We've got measures of it. We know that is causal, and we know that we can change it. We can boost it in coaching, and that this gives us an evidence-based form of coaching. It certainly is not all you do on coaching, but could be the kernel of a good claim of scientific basis of coaching. So it's my hope that, having watched over my lifetime psychotherapy go from essentially quackery to 60% outcomes, is that coaching is going to be much better than this because of the scientific developments, and that we can braid our human skills as coaches with this marvelous new thing, AI. By the way, I read all the doom stuff about AI. The doomsayers are out there. I have yet to see in 300 of these things a hallucination. I haven't seen a misstatement of fact, and I think there are dangers to AI and there are benefits. Coaching seems to me an area in which the benefits hugely outweigh the dangers. So what I started with, doctor, I want to be happy. This notion that 30 years ago we had nothing to say, except you don't want to be depressed, do you? Now we have something to say. We've got a science of well-being, and we've got a practice of well-being. It's called coaching. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Coaching Revealed, brought to you by the Institute of Coaching. You can learn more about the Institute on our website at instituteofcoaching.org. You can stay up to date with new episodes of our podcast by liking and following Coaching Revealed. You can also find us on social media on LinkedIn, Instagram, and X with the handle Institute of Coaching. We also love hearing from our guests, so please reach out to us with thoughts you have on this episode and any questions you have about coaching. Until next time, this is Emily Tarani with Coaching Revealed.